Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and this is my review of Final Fantasy XIV Futures Rewritten, patch 5.4. Following the climactic events of Shadowbringers in 5.3, we're now moving towards the next expansion's storyline, whatever that turns out to be. The main new features of 5.4 are the end of the Eden Raid series, fights 9 through 12, and their savage variants, new main scenario quests to further the story, and a new story dungeon. And of course the next part of the Weapons Trials questline. The patch also featured a lot of smaller changes, such as the new classic theme for the user interface, which I like, but it's a bit blindingly blue. They need to desaturate it a bit, I think. There were also some changes to Monk, and a change to Bard. So what do we think of the new patch? And to reiterate, this video will have spoilers in. There will be footage of my first time through some of the new fights, and of course I'll be talking about the new stuff a little as well. But to start with the events of Eden, whilst I felt a little underwhelmed by the finale, I wouldn't say it was bad or anything. For me, Eden had a very strong second act, but this last segment has proven a little disappointing. Perhaps I just built up my expectations too much in my mind. The plot was a little bit cliche in some areas, but it was interesting and it gave us some nice closure for certain characters we had known about for a while, but they had been presumed dead. And Gaia's arc with Miniphilia reached a fairly satisfying conclusion. I would say that it definitely suffers a little from the lack of Rienja, if only because a lot of the progress seems to be, we have no idea what we're doing, but let's just hope for the best. As for the fights, mechanically speaking, the first two that were shown in the trailer were fine, but I didn't find them all that exciting. Whereas the final two stood out as a lot more, well, standout. What did you think? The first one was a retread using a model from Dissidia, I believe, and just a little bland to me. Second fight was a lot cooler from a story perspective, and I imagine a lot of you managed to guess from the trailer just who that was, based on the sword. Whereas the last two fights ramped it up a lot, and well, that last one in particular was a little unexpected. I enjoyed that it continued the trend of final raid fights going crazy, with the exception of Alexander Prime, who is very understated compared to Bahamut, Omega, and Eden, huh? Other than the second boss, I didn't really like the aesthetic design of the bosses visually though. First was a reused Dissidia model, I think, second was cool and kind of berserky, whereas the third was, well, you know, basically a fusion of a few things we already saw, which is okay, it's fine, it's just whatever. And the last was, well, it was very Earth Mothery, shall we say. Speaking of which, there was, I suppose, some nice foreshadowing with Gaia's name, when you consider Emmett Selk's real name and all that. As for the main scenario content of the patch, I was surprised at the amount we got. 4.4 only had around 6 quests, and 3.4 was around 10. Obviously there's no set amount of main scenario we're supposed to get, but I was pleased with this patch's story content. It felt like we had, well, A, we had a beginning, middle and end to a specific plotline, as well as B, continuing the main plot. Whilst there wasn't anything quite as dramatic as 5.3, we're getting things set up for the next expansion and I'm intrigued to see where it goes. There was some speculation whether or not the Admiral was teasing a new job with her 2 pistols, but upon vaguely careful examination, I believe she only had 1 new animation, meaning, I mean it's possible, but I wouldn't put too much stock into it just from that. 14 has at times teased new jobs in this manner, so it might well be that we're going to get Corsair, or Chemist, or something else using those dual pistols, but for the time being I'm not sure if that 1 new animation is much to go on. Bozar, of course, had a lot of Beast Tamer stuff going on, and that's a job I could see being interesting, as long as it's not just a limited job. Personally, I think Judge would be a cool job to put in, and I'd play that. I mean, I play everything, but I'd play that in particular. Blue Mage is also going to hop up to level 70 soon, and whilst that job is enjoyable enough, it's still relegated side content, but you know, it's a fun extra thing to do in the game, I suppose, but I get why some people were disappointed as they wanted it to be their new main job. 5.4's future updates, like, you know, 5.4.1 and such, will give us the finale of the Ishgard restoration, which presumably will then lead to an Ishgard housing district. Might have to relocate there, but the only problem with the Ishgard housing concept is that I live in England, and I feel like 90% of the time it's like misty or foggy or overcast outside. So I'd rather my in-game house not reflect that, which is why at the moment I'm in mist. It's like, a beach with nice blue skies. That's what I like. I really need to move country, I guess, huh? But there will also be more Boza content, including, I think there's going to be something like a 48-man raid, and then like a 24-man hard version of that raid, but I'm not entirely sure what's going on there, but we'll find out soon. Looks kind of cool though, I'm looking forward to that. Well, that about does it for the MSQ discussion, but I do want to point out the optional quest that can be undertaken for those who have completed all of the Shadowbringers role quests, as being very interesting, and I wonder what that could be setting up. If you've not done it, I would definitely suggest taking one of each role to max level and doing those quests so you can experience it. There's also some nice kind of closure for certain Shadowbringers plot elements too. But next up, there's the weapons questline. Ruby, Sapphire, and now Emerald are dealt with, leaving Diamond alone, unless we get like Diamond and then a secret extra one. But I'm curious how we'll go from here, as it seems like they want to have us use the G-Warrior mech again, so maybe we'll fight Diamond weapon with that, then have a trial fight separate from it. As for Emerald, I enjoyed the fight. I was a little confused by one of the mechanics initially, but for the most part they felt intuitive and cool. The arena and themes of the fight likewise were nice to see, and in general this patch seemed to be trying out some interesting new mechanics that I was a fan of. Rarely, 14 has mechanics that just outright feel obtuse or unfun, even if there's not much, say, technically wrong with them. Comes down to the individual, I suppose. For me, I can't stand the birds fight in Part 2 of Eden, but for the most part there aren't many fights in the game that I hate getting. And if I do sigh at a fight, it's usually just because it's something like Lakshmi, where it's so close to being level cap that you almost have your capstones, but you don't, so you're feeling a lot weaker and it takes a lot longer than you would like, but it's not a big deal. Overall, I'm pleased with this patch, and I think it was a good addition to the game. There were some nice new housing items put in, and there's a lot of new glamour items I now need to obtain, what with that being the true endgame. And all of the edgy tomestone gear means I can resurrect a character I made when I was 12, I think, in all his edgy, masked goodness. So if you're wondering, is it a good time to resub and play? I would say, sure. Shadowbringers is the best story expansion for the game, and they've made a lot of nice changes in other areas too. Jobs, for example, are all very well balanced right now, for the most part. Even if, say, Bard had low DPS, and I don't know how Bard is after that one tiny potency change, but just an example, even if it's a little underwhelming, it's not like people are going to defenestrate you for playing any job. So I do think it's a good time to hop back in. Back in Heaven's Ward, some people were like, oh no, not this tank, we want warrior tanks only, blah blah blah. But nowadays, every job's pretty viable. Yes, one job will always do the most damage, and one job will always do the least damage, but it's quite flexible now too. If you've been absent since 5.3 and are waiting for more content, maybe you want to come back and play, or maybe you want to hold off until 5.5 so you can be ready for the new expansion. I know some players like to beat an expansion, say Shadowbringers, and then quit the game until just before the next expansion is out, then catch up in everything in one go. That's definitely a good way to play the game. It's very valid, I used to do that. But I also think there's enough to keep people interested if you're doing like a sort of rolling subscription where you just keep playing constantly. Because what I now do is I go through like cycles with the game. There will be bursts where I play a lot, like I'll do every roulette every day. Then I'll sort of, when like something else comes out I want to play, I'll maybe just hop on Final Fantasy XIV like a little bit, like just 10 minutes a day or something. So both approaches are good. I'm not going to say one's, necessarily better than the other. The nice thing about the game is you're not really punished for taking breaks all that much, and I think that's very important for a game like this. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Ciao.